It's Lake Effect from Milwaukee Public Radio. I'm Mitch Tyke. For baseball fans, the winter wait is just about over. Pitchers and catchers will report to spring training camps in Arizona and Florida in the next few days, with other players following soon thereafter. But spring training isn't just a warm-up for the players. It also lets Major League Baseball's umpires dust off the cobwebs and home plate and take the field for the first time since the World Series. From 1971 through the end of the 2007 season, Milwaukee native Bruce Froemming was one of those umpires. Froemming's 37-year tenure was tied for the longest in Major League history, and in those nearly 4 decades, he became one of the most distinctive umpires ever to wear the mask and chest protector, calling balls and strikes loudly enough sometimes to be heard in the outfield bleachers. Froemming's career is the subject of a new movie premiering tonight at the Rivoli Theater in Cedarburg. Jim Crines is the producer, writer, and director of Bruce Froemming and Life on the Diamond, and Sean Hoffman is the editor on the film, and they're with us in the Lake Effect studio. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you very much for having us.
Of all the interesting stories surrounding baseball, why would people be interested in an umpire? What makes Bruce Froemming such a compelling story for you?
I think we were talking about this morning, actually, and I think that not a lot of people know the underbelly of umpires. These are a component of baseball, and I think it is important to kind of show all aspects of it.
Well, and at the heart of things, Bruce Froemming, of course, has some local resonance because he is a Milwaukee boy.
Absolutely. Bruce is better known probably in Milwaukee than he is nationally, and I think that he became an interesting topic for a film because he umpired more seasons than any other umpire in Major League history. And the dangers of the game, the stresses of the game, the travel, it's remarkable in terms of anybody willing to put up with that kind of gaffe. And again, Bruce is appealing as a topic because he's had some interesting altercations, if you will. He was known as kind of a leveling force on the field, and players didn't mess with him.
There are a lot of anonymous umpires out there, but Bruce Froemming was not an anonymous umpire.
More than 5,000 games, and it would be impossible to be anonymous. And I think Sean, even coming into this project, loves baseball. But what was your interpretation of baseball?
I was the typical baseball fan where I just enjoyed the experience, loved the teams. Who was that guy in blue behind home plate, And working on this project with Jim here, I've gotten a whole new respect for what an umpire is, referees in general.
Are baseball umpires in a different class than, say, football referees and basketball and hockey refs?
Yeah, I think a couple of the subjects in the film speak to that because when there's a play at first or second or home, there's one guy making that call. When you see it in the NFL, there's 5 guys who commiserate and they make a determination. But once you make that out sign or that safe sign, that's it. There's no returning it over. And so let's say an umpire misses that call and everyone's like, oh, my God, did he miss that call? And we have the benefit of instant replay. But it's him against those 50,000 people. It's not like there's 4 umpires commiserating and making a decision. If he messes up, which they do occasionally, and surprisingly they don't mess up as often as you think they would, it's much more specific. In baseball, in the game is much more specific because a guy hits a home run as opposed to an assist in basketball.
Yes.
Do you agree with that?
Oh, yes. Every play there's a decision being made in baseball. Football, fair catch, done. Play's over.
So let's go back to the beginning of the Froemming story. It was the late 1960s when he started his umpiring career. Why does anybody, but Bruce Froemming in particular, why do people go into umpiring?
I think a lot of them are like us. We love baseball, but I wouldn't do what they do. I went down to the school last year, and you got to be crazy. 5 weeks of military camp. But I noticed to the T there was something intangible or indefinable as to why these people were there. And I personally wouldn't do it. I don't care about anything that much to spend that much time with it. But going back to Bruce, he knew at 18 that's what he wanted to do. He told his wife, Rosemarie, that I'm going to umpire in County Stadium someday. And there's so much sacrifice and so much, I don't want to say selflessness because they're chasing their own dream. But when you recognize in the minor leagues, they're paid almost nothing, and especially in Bruce's day. So you got to ask yourself, what's wrong with this guy to want to give up his life for the chances of making the bigs? You got to keep in mind there's only 70 umpires that are going to make it to the bigs at any given time. And those guys aren't going anywhere soon. And the most remarkable thing that we've discovered in my talking with Bud Selig and talking with a lot of people, he's not in the film, but I've spoken to him numerous times, and you will not see another Bruce Froemming again because they're not going to allow it to happen.
They want the umpires to remain nameless, to keep filtering them out the younger generation.
Well, and you alluded to this before, but I wonder if you could go into a little more detail. The way baseball players work towards the major leagues is obviously really well known. I mean, you've got your scouts, you've got your draft, but it's not like there are very many 10-year-old Little League umpires. What is the path to the major leagues for umpires? Where do they start?
That's the schools. There's the Wendelstedt School, and then there's the Jim Evans School, both in Florida. And you do not get into the minors without going through these schools. And you'd be amazed at how many people do go through this. They pay $5,000 to spend 5 weeks out of their own pocket. And some of them have done some high school, some have done some community umpiring, but this is the real deal. And the goal at the end of this is to be recognized as one of the best of that class. And then you go to a thankless job in the minors. So it's kind of a bittersweet victory.
Yeah. So who makes the decision to move them up to the next level, and on what basis?
Again, it's a little boot camp issue. When I was down there, it's yes sir, no sir. Harry Wendelstedt, was akin to God down there.
He was a longtime major league umpire.
Oh, yeah. He was. He's one of those guys that you'll never forget if you followed baseball. And he's very revered as an umpire. He's a very strong umpire, but they have a group of lieutenants and colonels there that run you for 5 weeks, and they will sit down in the war room and they'll decide who gets the blue ribbon. And I think that they're very appreciative of these kids that give 5 weeks, but let's face it, I mean, only the best are going to move on.
Is it similar when once you get to the minor leagues, there's some kind of decision-making process about who's going to move up from Class A to Class AA and AA to AAA?
Kind of like players, who's out there, who's really trying their best, who cares that they're there, who's trying to move up.
And there is a certain degree of recognition. Even Bruce Fremming alludes to the fact that Al Barlick, a name that 99% of the people, including me, didn't know before I started talking to Bruce. And he's a guy that basically took Bruce under his wing and, did what he could. I don't want to say nepotism or I don't want to say favoritism, but I will. There's a certain degree of...
You could call it mentorship. Would be
well, that's a good way to put it. But let's put it this way. In any business, if I wanted to get a job here, it would sure help if somebody here liked me. So I think that, like anything else, there's a degree of being in the right place at the right time and making the right person happy at the right time. But at the same time, you have to be good at what you do.
Well, and along those lines, we keep talking about how Bruce Fremming had this distinctive style. But for people who maybe are just more casual fans or really don't pay attention to that sort of thing, what made Bruce Fremming distinctive as an umpire?
Other than his girth. He is a remarkable figure, probably because as I got to know him, and I've known him pretty well over the last year, you get to the underbelly, pardon the pun with him, you get to the softer side of a guy, and he really is soft. But on that field, you have to be cast iron. And the umpires today, the younger guys, are treated with a little less respect. But when he walked out there and said, this is it, stop talking, this is it, we have nothing to discuss.
There was no bull.
There was no bull, and they pretty much said, okay. It was that authoritative figure that, and umpiring is very contentious in the sense that you could dispute anything. But when he held up that hand and when he said that's enough, even Euchre, who's in the film, says, you knew when he had enough.
And that was enough.
Well, and this was a guy who they say, when he was calling a game behind home plate, you could hear him in the outfield bleachers.
If you don't hear about an umpire in a game, he's doing his job right. And they don't want to be the spotlight, but you're right. Bruce had a very distinctive call, and they give it their own flair. There's a book out called As They See Him by a New York Times writer, and they like to give them their own distinctive calls, and you've seen some of that. And some guys like a little bit more flair than others.
Just a little recognized, a little trademark for themselves, I think, too, yeah.
Well, and you've got this sort of inherent contradiction because on one hand they're supposed to be invisible, but on the other hand, if they're going to get noticed and moved up, they've got to do something.
They have to be, distinguished, absolutely.
Yeah, and again, alluding to Sean's comment, they have to make quick calls. They have to make judgment calls. Bruce now works for MLB in a consultant capacity where he goes to games and he will critique and or watch the umpire's performance. And I think that you can be wrong on a play, but an umpire has to act, I saw that, this is the way it is, you got to sell the call. And theoretically, the fans can come down and lynch you, so what you have to do...
Can't make it look like a maybe call.
No, there's no maybe. You know what? If there's maybe, it's like they sense the indifference and they will attack you. It's kind of like, you sell something. Any salesman can make you believe in something, and on some calls, you got to sell it. And no, I saw that, and that's the way it is. And the guy, maybe he did.
Yeah, okay.
Did Bruce Fremming tell you this, or do you get the sense that umpires replay games in their minds later on, or once the game has happened, they put it out of their mind?
They have to. I think that there's talk about this, Sean, when we were doing the film, that let's say hypothetically they get in their face and there's a big argument. And Bruce even said, that's yesterday. Unless they draw blood, there's no carryover. And I think that I believe him. And people say what they say to make themselves sound good. If a guy calls you a name in a game, you're going to remember that. But they say they